I was talking with Corey and Meagle the other day, just a couple days ago, and they confirmed that in their opinion, I reminded them of Corey's father, Mike, to which I thought immediately in my head that I guess Harvey Dent was right, wherein he said, you either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain. And I say that for a couple of reasons. I told Jill the same thing, my wife. She said, well, don't you like Mike? I absolutely do. Haven't you always respected his writing? I said, absolutely. She's like, what's going on there? Well, for the formative part of my early years of preaching, Mike would always do something just like he just did when I went up to talk to him. It's changed a little bit, but it was always like, hey, what are you reading? And so I always kept in the back of my pocket this list of very substantial books that I had been reading recently, just in case I was going to run into him, because I was terrified that I was going to come back and say, The Far Side, Calvin and Hobbes, which I do read, and they're awesome, and other literature as well. He did that tonight. He kind of backdoored into it, and he says, hey, have you read obscure author about obscure subject with an obscure title? And my answer was, well, I think so. I don't know. I read a lot of stuff. I have no idea what I read recently. So that's my new solution to the problem is to feign age and ignorance. But I've always appreciated Mike and his deep study. And Jill confirmed that, yes, I probably do remind people of Mike Willis, and I probably am not bothered by it as much as I put on airs about. I want you to think about this not-so-obscure quote from a not-so-obscure author, Samuel Clemens, or you may know him as Mark Twain. And he writes, and this is a very Twain perspective, not Twain, the proper office of a friend is to side with you when you are in the wrong, because nearly anybody will side with you when you are in the right. And I want you to think deeply about that, because on the surface level, the first reading of it or thought through it, you go, wait a minute. If your friend's wrong, you should tell them that they're wrong. Absolutely correct. But where should you be standing when that takes place? What should you be positioning yourself towards? How should you see and value that position in place? Our world is incredibly fractured. Sin has done this. God's hand has done this too, with the scrambling of language. That makes it difficult for us to unite in some ways. And that exists in the context of a world that puts on the perspective of being incredibly connected. What I suspect has gone on, especially with the advent of the most recent iterations of social media, is we have created a veneer of friendship, connection, and commitment that is not as real as everyone acts that it could be and is. That is not to say that you cannot have deep relationships with people that you do not occupy the same airspace with. It just requires a whole lot of different kinds of work that are often outside our area of expertise and familiarism with. And I say that also noting and surveying my own reading and yours perhaps and your experiences, that we have now a culture that has made it challenging to build real relationships to the level that if you go down the remaining brick and mortar bookstores or you scroll through your preferred podcasting app, how many of those podcasts focus on personal development in the realm of relational building or skill building and social skills? I think that's probably testimony to the reality that all of us want to have deep and meaningful relationships. Ones that aren't just kind of just good enough to not feel awkward, but not real enough that we actually are truly connected with each other. I said this Sunday morning in our Bible class, and I'll reiterate it a second time here. This is not exactly on topic, but is certainly in the context of both that lesson and this one. When you're looking to build those close relationships that are around you, whether it be spousal or close friend, more important than the butterflies that start welling up within you when they're near you, and more important than whatever you see your similarity of life goals laying out, is the ability to truly and transparently communicate with each other. What you're looking for is someone who, when you talk and when you describe a potential future, that everything around them shuts down and all they want to know is what you have to say. And then when they speak back, every indication to you is giving the sign that they listened to every word. And those words were important, and you were valued. And that kind of conversation goes on hour after hour without any desire for it to end. And you get to a point where all the barriers of, I don't feel like I can talk to this about anyone, or I don't want to talk about this with anyone else. That's what you're looking for. All the rest of the stuff, the butterflies, they kind of fade and rise and fade and rise. Whether the life plans match or don't, most of that works itself out. Because what you're doing in that committed kind of communicative space is you're saying, I want a real relationship, not a contract. In absence of real communication, your marriage is just paper. Even if you keep the covenant, it is still just paper. And if you want to have a marriage that can transform the lives of the children around you and the people around you, then it is essential that you can communicate in a way that your real feelings are found valid and your real desires are found to be safely shared and experienced. Because when you get to the point where you start reading, say, Ephesians chapter 6 that we just talked about and was read for us, you can instantly recognize the powerful value of these two voices no longer being independent from one another, but dependent upon God, and the soloist has become the chorus, so that the entire dad are a team. And every time I try the end around, the outcome is exactly the same. And so you're trying to kind of think through that in that regard, because that profound perspective will then roll itself into the relationship of the leadership space of the home and the workspace of the home. You see, ancient truths, like the scriptures are revealing to us in small portions, are essential for us to be able to thrive and survive in a context where everything feels weird. Everything feels like it's moving too fast for us to keep up with. I was not a great student in high school, but I did all right. You know, I graduated. I successfully accomplished the same thing that 96% of the people who started finished with, you know. And I took some advanced classes. And I remember, like many others, sitting with my kids, and in about 5th grade, things got hard all of a sudden for me. I'm like, wait a minute, this is 5th grade math. I should be able to do this. I did pre-calculus in high school. This is 5th grade math. Every generation experiences those same kind of things where the generation ahead of us has a little bit of a leg up on the generation that we're part of and the generation behind us. The only way to survive that kind of soup blender experience is to have something worth clinging to that is independent of the shifting expectations of society. Now keep in mind, those kids were also not learning how to shoe horses and how to properly engage in defense against the wild hordes or any other prior generational construct. And so they were learning things that were more needed for them that maybe we didn't need to learn because we had different priorities. But even with that, it's still that same need. We got to figure some things out. So in the text of Ephesians chapter 6 and verses 1 through 4, we have kind of pinched to zoom a little bit in on one aspect of this relationship. We've zoomed in and say husband and wife, there's a core there. So let's zoom back out. Let's use our 2-finger pinch or our 2-hand. Generationally, you can tell what generation a person is by how they zoom. You can kind of figure out the age. Also, their quality of vision comes into place. Watch them. You'll figure it out who you are. We have not Gen X, it's like Zoom technique. Zoom out a little bit with me, and we're going to think about some things. And so as we discuss Sunday morning, the first thing I want you to think about is how God created relational structures for us to exist in. Fundamentally, marriage in the home begins to be expressed well in Genesis chapter 2 and verses 18 and following. And how God, by design, created a harmony of humanity to then dwell and live as a representation of divinity upon first the temple he built, and then after the expulsion from the garden, the creation as a whole that he has provided. And then God provides the structure of human government, perhaps thinking about Genesis 9 or the synopsis that Paul grants to us in the text of Romans. And more acutely, perhaps for us, is to think about the local church. These are different types of governance that God has set for us. But among these, and all the others we may think of, the home really is the bedrock of the relationships that matter. God uses it as a teaching tool. This is the home, as a representation of the church. And every generation's experience struggles with how to do that. I know that for a lot of us, when we think about the home in particular, we feel like there's this lost home that is no longer around us. I want to suggest to you that's a bit of a myth. We create myths to make us feel better about how things are bad or good. In the 1700s in Europe, did you know that because of the high cost of divorce, that the peasant class, when seeking divorce, auctioned off their spouses for a while? It's weird. Yeah, I read that in a book, by the way. A nerd. But it's weird. You're like, what do you mean? Like, no, literally, they would go to the market square because they wanted a divorce, but it was so expensive to be divorced. Auction off the spouse. In one case, there is a series of auctions that took place where the spouse, the wife, always, was auctioned off for a pence each. And she was taken off by her new husband, purchased at the auction block, because it was so expensive to engage in divorce. Further, although a slight bit anecdotal and a little bit of hyperbole takes place, nearly all of our nursery rhymes have a tendril of beginning as scare the kids so they stay in the house when the parents go out to do things. Now, I want you to think about that in our flip-flop society. How many of us would go, wait a minute, you left your kids home alone? Who would do such a thing? And I could do this, and I'll say it this way. How many of you were latchkey kids when you were growing up? I had keys to the house before I had keys to the car. When I come home in 4th grade, 5th grade, ain't nobody there. And I was expected to get at my chores. Not that many of them. We were living in suburban California. And so my chores were not like I had to go out to the farm and do things. I had to mow the yard. I had to pick up after the dogs. I had to make the appearance of having done my homework. I was pretty good at making the appearance, at least, not the actual doing part. But this is various ways in which we have to recognize that there is no idealized historical example of family life and husband and wife experiences to be found in society. We're like, oh, that's great. Let's go back to the Bible. Okay, let's go back to the Bible for a little bit and think about how it was for then. Let's talk about Solomon. Anyone want to use the Solomonic model of marriage? Everyone's like, absolutely not. That seems like the bad idea. But yet, was he not one who was granted exceptional wisdom? And it didn't mean he didn't engage in folly. He was exceptionally wealthy in his foolishness. Or we could go on and think about all of the wild and awful experiences of the patriarchs of God's people and say, well, yeah, that's under the Old Testament. Well, we can also read the Corinthian correspondence and see that it's not ever rosy. So when Jesus deals with the subject, then, he actually heightens our awareness back to the beginning in Matthew in chapter 19. He says for us, if we are trying to develop a home that then can lead souls towards righteous behavior, our only option is to try to get back as far as we can to the base code or the bottom line. And he says, From the beginning, it was not so. And so once again, we must accept the reality that if there is the grand troublemaker in all of our own individual sorrows or communal sorrows, I can tell you who their names are, and I have to start with mine. I am always the problem. Ergo, we are also always the problem. Generationally independent of those circumstances. And so again, back in Ephesians 6, when Paul begins to speak to us once again and say, children, obey your parents, the challenge is a little higher. My friend Chris Huntley did a little bit of research over the last 4 or 5 years into a separate reading of the text of Genesis. And I want to suggest to you something interesting in the punishment category of Adam and Eve. How many of you, this is not a survey, you can answer your hands if you wish to. This is not mandatory. When you think about multiplication of pain in childbirth, is your first thought physical? It's a yes or no question. So if you think it's physical as your first thought, raise your hand. All right? I think that way first. My brain goes, multiplied pain in childbirth. But I want to challenge you with an idea right now. Prior to sin entering into the world, the progeny of Adam and Eve, what kind of pain would have been expected spiritually for them? Would there have been any concern, should they bring in children of the world, to their spiritual rebellion? Wait a minute, let's do the math in my head. Should they have had children prior to the arrival of the rebellion of Eve and Adam as a team, their pain would have been less. Even if their physical pain would have been high, because how many of you weep for the loss of your children spiritually or another person's child daily? How many of you weep for someone's soul who you love with the highest level of compassion, but you can't figure out the words that will bring them back to the cross? So while there is possibly and probably a good reason to go first to the physical pain corner, I want to suggest to you that when this punishment is being laid out at the feet of Adam and Eve, don't discount the spiritual application to a spiritual consequence for them and for all humanity. Because when you bring children in the world, you take a risk. You risk everything, even though you know nothing. Which is then why I say it's weird when God speaks to children and says, obey your parents. Now that also helps us get a little context there, because when he's speaking to children there, clearly we're not talking about all children. Because first he's talking about those who can probably hear the message. So our concept of accountability is going to come into a certain degree. But he's asking and pleading that this is a way in which you and I, who are children at times in our lives, obviously, right, can buck against the system of this world. Our willingness to obey our parents, as it says, in the Lord, for this is right, to honor our father and mother, is one of the first opportunities we have as disciples of God, as followers of the creation, even before we may have committed ourselves fully to join the Ark of Zion, to fight the devil and win, to fight against the consequences of rebellion. This then offers for us profound insight into the relationship of children and parents, because these commands are not merely unidirectional, where it's, well, parents do all these things right. No, parents have obligations that go to their children, and children have obligations that go to their parents, and that's all existing underneath the umbrella of all that is above them. That's really what we're looking to accomplish and try to understand in order to better grasp the meaning of what it means to be bonded together. Husband and wives are, by God's design, going to be bonded together in marriage. They're going to be united in ways that initially do not make sense. Think about it this way. This is the experience of nearly every newly married couple. Maybe all, but I can't certainly verify, but I think it matches nearly every. You go to the ceremony, all the special fancy words are said, whatever By the way, there's no actual rules for a wedding. You don't have to do whatever everyone else says you want to do. Just realize that's okay. But you do whatever that is. The Jedi waving of the hand, the do you take, yes I do business. And we all think that when you walk down the aisle, all of a sudden that couple is magically changed. You realize the same people who went up are the same people who go down? They got to figure it out. They got to figure out what it means to be bonded. And they almost always talk about how a few weeks later, sometimes even the next day, I'm married now. This is weird. This is not what I thought it was going to be like. And then with communication and time, it has potentially become more than they ever thought it was. Paul is trying to help us glean forth an idea in this first level of the command to capture the principle of a God-honoring relationship, because there's something more going on than just two people together. In Gottman's research entitled The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work, he points out that the biblical principles, the ethical relationship of a marriage allows these unions, when God is brought into it, to be evidentially based as more successful than marriages that God is not part of. And that research shouldn't be a surprise to those who are biblically minded. Investing in God first, with a commitment towards God as a king and goal, it's going to make the possibility of the work that's going to come up when we begin the nurturing side of things actually possible in the ways that matter. In Psalm 127 and verse 3, the Bible tells us, this is from the Hebrew Bible and the biblical text of the Old Testament, that children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Now that's often, as the poetry does, it's an isolation from other things. And certainly we've already identified that there's risk in raising children. But for the Israelite, they're telling us something that we don't often think about. Your greatest blessing as a parent is the child that God has given to you. It is not their accolades. It is not you living through them to relive your childhood. It is they themselves as independent beings and all that that entails. They have great potential and great agency, but never forget the fact that they are amazingly a gift for the future. And it's not always for the parents. The future may involve things that God has in store for them. Because just pause for a moment and think. How many children were granted unto someone, but then God needed them somewhere else? God needed them to be raised away from their family and their loved ones in order to accomplish something good. Rescuers and redeemers. Even God's people are sent away from their homeland to somewhere else because God needs them there. Often at times where we would feel like, well, that's a prime part of their life. Our perspectives are often kind of fueled by our selfishness. But I want everything here for me and around my circumstances. So as we talked about last night, I'll echo again here. This is helping us capture that in the cohabitation of the home, while your first goal might be making sure that their physical needs are met, really in what's going on in the larger sense is you are imbuing a generational link to kids and people you will never know. You're instilling in them godly wisdom for someone you'll never meet. They may end up doing the thing that's amazing that you thought you could do because God needed them to do. And while certainly not an exact example, you can think simply of the task separated between David and Solomon. Or more specifically, just think of your own experiences, the things that your parents did for you and how you were able to use that good for others. In Proverbs 20 and verse 7, the wisdom of the scriptures also remind us, the righteous man leads a blameless life. Blessed are his children after him. So your gift to them is not an inheritance. It's not great wealth. If you're trying to give a reward to your kids and you yourself are inheriting them from God, give them a good name. Give them a blessed name. This is well above the later expectations for the person in life that they can rise to. Make sure they're not ashamed of you as a parent. In Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8, when it begins to lay out its layers of instructions, there is a simple admonition. My son, hear the instruction of your father and do not forsake the law of your mother. So I want to link these things again together. You'll notice in Ephesians, we're reminded that on the child side, we have an obligation to listen to our parents and obey their instruction, especially as it is in the Lord. Parents, you are given the admonition then to lead in ways that are righteous in the Lord. Now, husband and wife, you too are bonded together as a pair or a team to accomplish that same goal. Now, I say all that because I'll ask this question. Parents and children, that's all of us now, that's every one of us, mathematically, right? How often do you feel alone? How often do you feel like you're the only one doing the thing? Whatever it is. James has made it a point recently. Remember I mentioned last night that James instructed me that I'm not allowed to have any monkey business, and I told you already that I brought 12 monkeys with me, so that's already taken care of. But he makes me make a joke whenever he's doing his chores lately, which he does have them, even though he's 17, he's a big boy, he still has chores, and he'll always have chores as he lives in our house. And he was like, I'm the only one who ever washes the dishes around here. Nobody else lifts a hand to help me. And he makes a big, the full-on drama llama comes out in the maximum capacity. I have no idea where he gets it from. Okay, maybe I do, and it's not Jill. But it just comes out completely. I'm the only one. Well, I'll tell you, I think all of us feel like that sometimes, legitimately. James isn't the only one who does dishes, but he likes to make it feel like it is. I want you to know that firstly, when you feel alone, your brethren, your spouse, your children, your elders have all felt that same way. But I also want you to know that you are not alone. Even if not everything's going right, even the marriage isn't rising to the level that it is, because everyone around you has probably been in your seat before. They may have been at the point in your marriage where it is right now and things aren't going exactly right. They may have the difficulties of, I haven't slept in 17 days because my kids are not doing right. And I'm just talking about when Jesse, my oldest, was little and wasn't doing right by the fact of he wasn't sleeping at night. He was colicky. And so that meant in our household that Jill was in charge of Jesse during the day. But you know what she needed to do? Sleep. So you know who took the night shift? Me. And you know who didn't sleep? Knucklehead. And then the other knucklehead who was little eventually outgrew it. That's just how it goes. And so your friends and your family here have been through it too. So when it gets bad, it gets hard, it gets difficult, don't keep it to yourself. Go and ask for help. Much in the way in which the proverb is telling us, my son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother. You have a lifetime of wisdom that surrounds you every day that will often emphasize our need to stick to God's plan or endure when it's hard. Because what have I been saying? Hard times make for strong people. And you'll need to be strong eventually for somebody else, if not only for yourself. Further, and this is super important, probably if you were going to ask me, what's the most important biblical principle for parents to find in their toolbox? And I'm going to say it is consistent, loving discipline. And let me clarify that very specifically. I am not talking at all about however you understand or interpret what the meaning of the rod is. There's a lot of room in that word and what that actually implies. And most of the time, we're probably too far on one edge or the other. I'm talking about consistent, loving discipline. Discipline is in the realm of instruction, of boundaries that do not change, and your consistency in returning to the same thing over and over again, and making sure that you're doing so. Remember our illustration? Not out of convenience. I'm disciplining you because I don't like what you're doing right now and it's wearing me out. You're loud when I want you to be quiet. You're exuberant when I want you to be soft. But we're disciplining about matters that actually change core character and behavior back to where it should be. And this is the illustration from my own childhood. You can pick your own. My mother was an amazing artist, wonderfully eccentric, but for whatever reason, during the early 80s, when Bugle Boy jeans became popular, especially the cargo pant versions, it also became popular at that time, and this will date you if you do this, to peg your jeans. Now, I was not necessarily the typical prototypical build to dress in any particular style, nor am I currently, and I don't care. But my mom all of a sudden decided to care. And so me, at age 15 and 14, pegging my Bugle Boy pants, earned the greatest amount of scorn that I'd ever heard from my mom. She said, "Don't do that, that's asinine." And I had to get the dictionary out because that was a word I hadn't heard before. It's not a curse word, it's just coarse. And I was like, oh. I got in trouble. And then you know what I did? Whenever she would drop me off for school or somewhere, I'd still bend over and peg my jeans because I'm a dumb kid. As an adult, this is a lesson I learned from that. As long as it doesn't violate God's will, and it's not going to get you in jail, and it's not really a big problem, don't make it one. Now, I eventually complied with my mom's request for other reasons as I matured a little bit. But as a parent, we often illustrate it this way. There's a hill to die on, and that one wasn't it. Because I realized eventually there are actual hills worthy to die on. And so if your kid wants to peg their jeans, let them. But I'm not going to fight for or against it on my side of things. That's your business. And if they want to dye their hair for summer camp, okay, whatever. You don't like it? Also, okay, whatever. But when they start asking questions about God and His will and His desires for a kingdom that's like no other, then that's the hill to die on. That's the one that actually matters. And that's where loving discipline comes in, where you can make consistent, timely instruction and correction to fix a problem now before it becomes a problem later. Because who they are today absolutely is who they will become tomorrow. And it'll start by being a reflection of you. When Mark and I were in the vestibule over there, we looked at Corey and Mike. They're going to be on the auction block all night long, so it's fine. They can take it. They're tough. And I looked over at Mark and I was, isn't that cute? Because they have the same mannerisms, similar glass tiles. But if you know the both of them, there's a tremendous wealth of differences between them as well, even though the core of their character is very much the same. And it came from upbringing, came from the time shared in a home. In Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6, we have a passage we're familiar with where it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." There are some who look at that as, well, if I just do my job just right, my kid will never fall away. Let me tell you that that is an irrational expectation. I love your commitment to the potential of that being the case, but realistically, that's not what the text is talking about. The devil doesn't get disarmed because you figured out and cracked the code of parenting. The devil will tempt them constantly. Even before you know what's going on, he'll find a way in. Even if, we have no digital technology in our house, we're disconnected from the world, there's no cell phones, there's no landline, there's not even the party line of the 50s available and the 40s where you pick up one phone and everyone's phone in the neighborhood goes. The devil will find a way in. What is going on here is an admonition that if you do your part, you can set them off on a journey that has the potential for greater faithfulness if they want it. And when they want it, and I believe actually every human being goes through a period that they do, You have equipped them to be successful should they choose it. That character matters that you're instilling in them. It's giving you the opportunity for letting them to grow up before the world causes them to burn down. Siegel and Bryson write in their work a lot entitled The Whole Brain Child. It tries to give us insight into the ways in which developmental processes take place. And this is something that I think we don't always catch just well. Here's my illustration for it. Generally, it's understood that the human brain does not reach maturity for boys. I'm an expert in boys. I'm not an expert in girls. I'm a functioning servant to that environment, but I'm certainly not an expert. That our brains don't really truly mature until we're 23. I will tell you that in my own experiences, that makes sense. I'm about 23 that I got less dumb. I'm still working on the not dumb part, but less dumb started around age 23. But then we tell ourselves, well, at 18, you're a legal adult. Absolutely. You can now do things that you could not do at age 17 that your parents legally may not have as much accountability and culpability for. So first, like Paul does to the brethren gathered at Ephesus and then to us, children, understand that. When you turn 18, you do not magically become smarter than you were when you were 17. So let me change the nature of those interactions. And I did this with our kids, maybe to my success, or maybe my failure. We'll see in about 30 years how this works out. But I coached them that this is what I want. I don't need you asking my permission to do things anymore. Because legally, yes, you can do whatever you want in that sense. But I would really actually you do two things. Think about what you're going to do. Try to make a good decision. And when you need help, don't wait to ask me until it's too late. You also don't have to take my advice. You don't actually have to. But how much of a better choice will you make if you at least consult me? Check me out. I'll tell you the options. Like, I was dumb at this point, and I did this dumb thing or this dumb thing, and I wish I would have picked this less dumb thing over here. And then, after you've made a decision, tell me about it. Tell me what's going on in your life. And I will not judge the process you use to get there. And no matter what happens, I will be there to support you if it goes bad and to cheer for you when it is successful. That's not the same as saying you're 18, figure it out. That's saying I'm here for you in all these steps, and I love you, and I want to make it successful for you because I understand that even though you're 18, you're still growing up. And even though I am 51, I too am still growing up. Some people are able to finish their advanced degrees before they're 23. I had to wait until I was 50. Do the math. It took me a long time to grow up. So it's okay. Encourage them to have a communicative relationship with you. And by the way, I'm talking kid to parent there. Just encourage your parents to talk to you about things, and you talk to them. Father's Day is coming up. Instead of giving a tie to your dad, how about sit down and say, hey, Dad, have lunch with me and tell me some stories about your life. Or I think the modern term is, Dad, tell me some dad lore. What went on in your life when you were younger? Why did you end up the way you are? Tell me a story I haven't heard before. Oh, and parents, if they do that, I'll say once again that this is another time where every story becomes a life lesson. Just be sneaky as how you slide it in there. Don't let them know what you're up to. Let their brains then grow, because at the same time when their physical manifestation of their memory cells and all those things are maturing, you know what's still happening as well that's super important? Their faith is burgeoning. And they're going to want to do things in the realm of their spiritual consideration that you didn't even think were things you could do. They may choose to serve in new ways. The generation around us most absolutely is more invested in helping their fellow person than my generation was. I know so many people in the millennial age bracket that have built their lives on an idea that I want to get to a point where my lifestyle helps other people before I, at the equal age, even thought that was a thing I should be doing. Because they understand the last part of this integrated relationship is actually super important. So Paul talks about the husband to wife, and then the parent to child, and the child to parent relationship. But I'll bring back a quote that I mentioned before because I think it actually identifies what we're really looking for. This is actually from G.K. Chesterton, and he noted this: that God commanded us to love both our enemies and our neighbors because they are often the same people. You need to live in a way so that your neighbors can become your friends, that they want to be your friends. And you may not know this is the nerd moment when we talk about the elastic nature of words. The Hebrew word ba'ah can be meaning both friend and neighbor. The stretchy, remember that stretchy thing? Hebrew stretchy, it's elastic. There's an overlap in these relationships that we need to explore because, here's the thing, eventually, though your child is still always your baby, and mama is always mama, if you work things right, they can keep that relationship, and they might become your brother or sister, and maybe even your friend. And if you do it right, you'll never have to compel them to come over and hang out, because they'll want to. Like, this is actually kind of all right. Not only does Dad pay for the food when we're here, it's kind of fun. I enjoy it. So then, think about it this way, because there's an opportunity for you to create a bridge generationally, because now we're talking about children outside of the compression factor of the home. Proverbs teaches us that friendship of the most valuable kind is rooted in love. It is really the only foundation on the earthly side that's strong enough to withstand a trial of any difficult kind. The text says in Proverbs 17 and verse 17, a friend loveth or loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. You're going to have tough times, and you're going to recognize that it's possible to have a bazillion acquaintances and yet lack the friend you need. I want you to think right now, I'll speak firstly to the youngest age bracket, the older folks. That's anyone older than me, so you do the math. Anyone younger than me, I'm talking to you right now. That includes you, Corey. You're younger than me. And if you want to be in that bracket, you can. Our younger age bracket often identifies success with popularity or influence. Oh, they've got so many followers on TikTok. Oh, they're at this new job. Oh, they got appointed to this new position. Let me get some real talk for you. No matter how much influence you have on this earth, no matter how much power you have, you will never be more important or valued than cheese. I want you to think about it right now. More people love cheese than love you. It's absurd, right? So is the idea that popularity matters in the ways that we think it does. It does not at all. It's vanity. And yeah, cheese is really good. That's just the truth. It's a reality. Whoever came up with cheese is pretty awesome. But that's actually something we need to conceptualize and get away from the ideas that says these are the things that make someone important to us. Their viewership, their influence, their power from the pillar that they've been placed upon. No, I want to tell you that you need to choose friends and relationships with a little bit more discerning tool. Oh, by the way, be this way as well. Proverbs 12 verse 26 tells us, the righteous should choose his friends carefully, for the way of the wicked leads them astray. If I could give all people one piece of advice when it comes to looking for someone to be a friend with, it's super simple. Look at the way they treat other people when they don't know that you're looking. If they're rude or dismissive or self-centered in those contexts, maybe their influence on you isn't going to be as good as you think it is. Very often we get anxious and we say, well, I want to be around people who are interested in the same things that I am. I understand that drive. I understand how, especially at the ages between 13 and 19, we get this hair in our head that says, I want to be different, just like everybody else. And we go find a crowd of people who dress just like us and act just like us and think just like us. And we go, we're different than everybody else because we're the whatever. In a few years, none of that will matter and you won't care. And you'll actually find out that people who are different than you are interesting because they're different than you. And they know things you don't know, and they've seen things you haven't seen. And then you might realize that what really matters is how you love one another. My friend Jeff Wilson and I were at Florida College together, and I was having a particular awful experience for a while due to family issues and other circumstances going on in my life. And Jeff saw me sitting around moping in the mopiest way possible. I'm not sure what I was doing, but Jeff, who is normally obtuse to human relationships, figured it out. And he said, hey, I got tickets to go to this football game this weekend. You want to come? Look, I was broke. I was mopey, but I wasn't stupid. Than you think I was. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And he's like, okay, we're going to go up to Gainesville and watch the Gators play. Now, everyone has like full opinions of college football. I'm an absolute college football agnostic. I understand football. I played football, as I've talked about before. The colleges that I actually have degrees from are absolutely undefeated in football. They've also never won a game because all of the ones I have degrees from do not actually have sports teams that played football. Although I did have San Jose State and other schools I like. So I get up there, we're going into Gainesville, and I'm already kind of coming off my mopiness, and we get up there, and he takes me, and he has got great tickets to see the Gators play. And I did not know this was possible, but did you know that at the Swamp, the student section can get as aggressive as to make a concrete structure shake when they cheer? Like you feel the whole thing. I was a little nervous. Like, this was built in the South. I don't know what this is going to be like. There's a swampland. This could be bad. But in the course of just a few hours, 24 hours in total, I went from the mopiest of the mopey to reminding myself that I was surrounded by a horde of people who cared about me. Just because he was willing to not take a date there and take me instead. Now, a few years later, I said, Jeff, you were kind of dumb. He's like, well, I ended up married. It's okay. I got to go instead of taking somebody else. And that is a testimony to a friend who had different interests than I did, and eventually we ended up having a whole lot of the same interests, but I didn't think about it then. He's also a giant nerd, interested in the Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible, and has done a lot of study in that area as well. He preaches down in Texas. Don't hold that up against him. Texas people are great. So I want you to again and evaluate your process for determining who you're going to be around. Toss aside the cultural standards of what their political affiliation is, their concerns about the day, and saying, are they good people who love God? Do they want the kingdom to grow? Are they loyal in relationships? Because you know that sometimes you will find greater loyalty in your friends than you do in your blood family. They'll care about you in ways that your own physical family won't even think about. In 1999, Jill and I had recently been married, and we came back from our visit up to Indiana, then Canada. There's stories about that I could tell, but I'll leave those for myself right now. And we come back home, and the congregation there asked me this question. How long do you think it would take for you to find a new place to preach? And I was like, that's a curious statement. And I'm like, well, if I had to, probably about 3 months. It seems like a reasonable amount of time. They said, great, you have 6 weeks. They had already determined that I was going to be released from my responsibilities as an evangelist. I did not know until later that they had hired a single preacher. They did not hire a married preacher, and they weren't happy with that. They didn't tell me these things until later. In that process, I ended up finding a place to go preach, and everything was fine. But during that time frame, out of nowhere, a check arrived. I still do not know who sent money to support us. I only know a few people who knew of our circumstances, but somebody cared about us enough to send us a check, and not a little check. It was enough to bridge the difference between where we were and where we needed to be. That kind of loyalty was found in the bonds of Christ, not because of blood, not because of shared experiences. They knew that their brother in Christ and sister in Christ needed some help. And they did not want to be known. I don't know. I have suspicions, but I've determined it's better to keep it as the mystery and to let it play out as it is. So loyalty to the same cause and the same character becomes a quality you need to be looking for. And by the way, remember, that's what you got to build in yourself between you and your children. That's the secret undertone of the information. Secondly is a principle of confidentiality. Listening to a news report that caused me to dig down a rabbit hole. And of the many things that were lost in the last 10 years, I think one of them is secrets. We have become a place where people just want to tell everything that's on their mind the moment it happens. And do you know that it's okay to be someone who keeps a confidence and doesn't tell the thing you just heard? Some stuff I don't even want to know. Like your medical conditions and stuff. If you know me really well, you can share it all you want. I'll talk to you about it and everything. But randomly in the middle of the road somewhere or just sitting in a restaurant, I don't need to know what's going on, the biological processes of your prostate or what's going on in your GI tract. I got enough of that at home, but my wife's a nurse. I don't need to know that. But above that, you need to become someone who is careful with your speech. Proverbs 11 and verse 9 tells us, with his mouth the godless destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge the righteous escape. There are times when it is absolutely essential in all of your relationships, especially in the closest of those, to just keep your mouth zipped. And have the power to look at someone and say, I'm sorry, that's none of my business. Could you please stop talking to me about it right now? That's a super awesome skill that's hard to develop. But it's super necessary. It's okay to tell someone, I don't want to hear the gossip. It's a perfectly powerful and wonderful thing to do. Even when you're balancing honesty. Just because it's true doesn't mean it actually has to come in through you. Others may be more equipped for it. That may limit the need for this next skill, but this next skill is essential. Become someone who is good at forgiving, because you are someone who needs to be good at being forgiven. You're on one level going to need to forgive yourself first and understand that God has forgiven you. But it is very common in all the edges of your relationships, especially in parent to child, to do the wrong thing when you meant to do the right thing. Here's my simple illustration of this for all kids that have more than one child in their family, but I've been told this happens otherwise. How many times did your parents call you by a sibling's name when they were upset with you? All the time? All the time, every time? It's not because you vanished and you didn't have an individual thing. It's because they're upset and they're frustrated and it's just rolling out. And you forgive them. It just happens. And you'll do it too, by the way. You'll get tired and you'll forget. You over there, number 3, come here. But it happens in more serious times too. You're going to break their heart. They will break yours. But if you want a real heart that's like God's, you'll forgive them and learn to accept the forgiveness when it is given to you. And then maybe you'll reach the point where you can have counsel and encouragement and wisdom shared. Because just as it is in marriage, if both of you are the same, then one of you isn't needed. So it is in all other constructs. You need what they know because they know the things you do not know. My kids have taken up a task for me that I no longer have to be responsible for when they're around. That is, when someone older than me asks me to fix their phone, I just go, James is right there. He knows everything you need to know about working your phone. But he's going to leave soon, so I'm going to find a new servant to take over that task. Well, there'll be somebody. They're going to get that job. But think about all the things that somebody around you sitting in this building knows that you don't know, that you call when you need help. For me down in Georgia, when I'm trying to figure out how to build a thing, I call Les Clark. Les is a retired machinist. He's got a small machine shop existing underneath his home-built cabin structure, and he has to change the entire electrical system to turn on his lathe. He has to go to a different phasing system, tell his wife that certain things can't be turned on upstairs to handle the load, and that thing fires up and we make things. stuff that I can't do on my own. Or if I need to figure out how to accomplish a certain task in the kitchen, you don't come to me first. I can smoke meat, and I can make things that are dangerous. But if you need a delicate pastry, I know exactly who to go to, and Linda Clark is the option for that. And so on, and I can run a list of the ways in which my brethren take up my slack and cover my weaknesses. Counsel, encouragement, and companionship. That then requires of us, as parents, as friends, as spouses, to then develop these skills in ourselves. Remember, it's a skill, it's a choice. It's a manifestation of a character that desires God, so that the relationships I share can actually be transformative. So parents, when you commit together to bring that risky life into the world, remember and know, yeah, you're taking a risk. There'll be some physical pain. And many nurses will tell me the quick answer to that is say yes to drugs, and other nurses will tell me the quick answer to that pain is say no to drugs. They're both right. You make that choice. But I'll tell you, though, that independent of the physical ones you make, you're going to be enduring spiritual hardship. So parents, first commit to never doing that alone. Commit that you will share the raising of the children. Which is how you answer this question. Hey, this is a James question. Do you think women should be in the kitchen? I'm like, absolutely. And we should be there too. That's where the food is. That's where tacos comes from. Like all of us got to be in the kitchen doing all the jobs. And if she wants to bake today, then that means I clean dishes. And if I'm baking today, that means, son, you're cleaning the dishes because she's getting the day off. Because we all belong there. As much as we all belong in the yard and in the garage. And I'll say this as an aside, husbands, fathers, if you haven't taught your daughters how to change a tire, you now have a responsibility to teach them this weekend how to change a tire. Because what would you rather have? Them changing their tire or them waiting for some rando to come up and change the tire for them? And if you do not know how to change a tire, I guarantee you someone in this congregation can teach them how to change that tire with speed and grace. And maybe you'll learn how to as well. Corey, I'm not looking at you with that one. I think you probably could change a tire if you really wanted to. You're looking a little scared over there, though. Look, he's nervous. It's not even Friday yet. These are tasks that we can accomplish well when we decide to do it together. So husband and wife, mother and father, friend and family, loved ones, understand this. You are never alone in your striving to be excellent before God. The bonding you have as a family is God-granted and God-given. Lean into it. Do not let the world make you think that you would be better off without your spouse around. You will be worse off. And if you want to feel what that feels like, sit with a widow or a widower for a little while and ask them how it is. Their hearts break for the loss of their love, and they wait for the opportunity to be with them again. And if you feel like you've got some worldly solution to God's problems that God's had already solved, go back to the text and think about it again. God gave you the answer in the scriptures. He's explained to you his value and your value, and how as a team, you and he can labor for your redemption, your family, and his grace. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessings that are found in the family and the home. We hope as students of your word that we listen to the scriptures, and then as those who love God, we apply ourselves wholly to the task of following them. As such, we first ask that you forgive us of our failings. Help us to be gracious to ourselves and be willing to forgive the times where we ourselves have fallen short. And then we ask that we become forgiving of others who have harmed and hurt us. And finally, we ask that you give us the strength to rise above the difficulty of just today, for today is enough. Watch over our souls, our families, and our hearts, and we ask this prayer in your Son's name. Amen. In just a moment, Derek is going to be leading us in song. We want to encourage you then to deeply ponder where you're at. First, if you're on the edge and you're like, well, maybe I'll get baptized eventually, maybe when the time is right or when I feel that impetus, look, there's nothing stopping you but you. Tonight's a great night. There's water here, people who love you, and you can commit yourself fully and wholly to the cause of Christ. It's worth it, 100%. There'll be hard times, but there'll never be times where you're alone. If you need our prayers and we can serve you in some way, let us pray with you and for you. We'll open up our hearts. We'll be the shoulder that you can cry on. We'll lift you up, and we'll help you in every way possible. So if there's something we can do to strengthen you, to help you, or if you need the forgiveness of God, come forward now. All together we stand and we sing.